the objective evidence and surveys, information discussion. As I said, TVIB, we recently started requiring objective evidence on some of the findings. We initially announced this back in the 2021 spring board meeting. And based upon some initial reactions in our conversations with folks, we're presenting some additional clarifications here today. First off, why does TVIB need objective evidence? One of the issues has been that people aren't achieving their corrective action plan timeframes. This is under the audit program that's being found. So that shows you there's a disconnect right there when an operator, has presented a corrective action plan to the TPO has accepted it, then if the operator doesn't fulfill it, then there has to be, a way to reconcile that. And right now, we don't have a good way to do that other than getting objective evidence. So the reason we need objective evidence is the Coast Guard, basically, they've told us that they see this as part of our oversight responsibility, and it helps us to ensure actually that you're complying with 137, 135, A11, Roman numeral 4. And in case you're wondering what that Roman numeral 4, that site is actually talks about the method used to verify corrective actions were achieved. So when do we need objective evidence? Well, TVIB, we're going to require objective evidence for any of the finding types that are listed over towards the right. So any major nonconformity, any unsafe condition, if there's a repeat finding, and then any higher risk issues or any findings that require a TISMIS revision, we're going to require objective evidence. Now, we'll say in the bottom point on the bottom left that depending on the risk profile of the vessel or the company, additional expectations may be needed. So we do have times when we require objective evidence on every finding of a survey or every finding of an audit, or we may go through a period of time where we expect objective evidence for the course of the next year until a company can demonstrate that they are where they need to be in carrying out their corrective action program. So that can change a little bit, but what we can tell you for sure is over on the right, those are the conditions that we're going to require objective evidence for. Not that we try to compare to what other TPOs do, but we do know that at least 2 of the bigger TPOs require objective evidence on every finding. So the Coast Guard kind of pushed to me a little bit and said, why don't we do that? Or how come, why are we different? Well, being different isn't necessarily wrong. So I see it different in that what we do as a TPO is we have a lot of internal survey program companies where some of the other TPOs are more on the external side of things. Nothing wrong with that. That's just the way they choose to do it. So we look at things that what's going to be the value, and it's ultimately the value really kind of goes back to the root of the value of a finding is to show that something's wrong, and then a corrective action plan is to fix it. That's really what these surveys and audits are all about. And of course, you're going to identify findings outside of those activities as well. But the corrective action plan for a major nonconformity is going to look a lot different than the name on the life ring was faded and needs to be reapplied. Yeah, well, it's important to be compliant and make sure the name on the life ring is legible. I don't think that that's a high risk issue that we should see a picture of a life ring with the boat name painted on it. Now, if you've got excessive oil in the bilge and fire hazards, yeah, I think that's something you're going to have to demonstrate. Yes, you took care of that issue. So we need some form of objective evidence. Hopefully that helps on the when. I know that we have had comments that the 4th bullet down says higher risk issues. Well, what that is to one person to another person may be different. And I do agree there's a bit of subjectivity to that. But the key word in it to me is risk. And what's the risk to personnel, property, or the environment? So how do you submit objective evidence? So objective evidence that is sent to audits@TVIB.org. When you submit objective evidence, the submitter needs to clearly identify which item of objective evidence goes with which TVIB finding number. We have to have our TVIB finding number in order to know what's associated to. So be sure, please, to communicate that back. whether you label the file name or what have you. It's up to you, but just be sure when Cindy and Lindsay receive that, they can look and know which one goes with which. We do request that video files be avoided. There are pros and cons to video. The pros are, they can show you more of a live action issue and move around, and you can probably do some test demonstrations a little bit better on a video. But the downfall is if we need to attach that objective evidence to a report or anything like that, you have no way of doing it with a video file. The other is that the video files are usually larger and they're harder to email and manipulate and store for future use. So I'm not saying we'll never take a video file, but I think if we do take one, it probably is going to need to be supplemented with some other file type, whether it be Word document, PDF, picture, whatever. During the review, TVIB will identify which findings require objective evidence. So while we're going to go through and mark, some of you have probably already seen this. There's a column on our sheet now to the far right that says objective evidence required. If there's a check mark, that means TVIB is expecting objective evidence to be produced back to TVIB. If there's no check mark, then we have no expectation of it. Okay, so that's pretty simple. If a finding has already been closed, we will include the objective evidence with the final report. So we'll have to get that. So if you give us a report, has a corrective action plan, and if it's one of the things that we want objective evidence for, then we're going to want that to be part of the final accepted report. That'll be, so basically we have verified as we're producing your final accepted report and it says it's closed, we need to be able to validate at that time it's closed. So that's why we have to have it before we produce the final accepted report. If a finding is still open, we'll follow up to obtain the objective evidence, or the owner managing operator can submit it, unsolicited once it's been corrected. Just make sure again you identify the things that goes with what boat, what audit survey, and what the finding number is. I want to make sure that everyone realizes this. It should be understood, but we do have cases where people close something with a plan, but they haven't actually carried out the plan yet. So plan to do a corrective action does not equate to completing a corrective action. So if you have a malfunctioning fire detection system, you can't put, we'll schedule a fire detection company to come out here and look at it next week and mark it closed. That's a plan to do something, but that's not actually getting it addressed.
Are you still getting corrective action plans a little more on the front end where there may be a notation that we are reviewing X item? And it could be a change oftentimes to a TSMS policy or things like that. I know that it was an issue in the past that we were getting corrective action plans in, that there would be statements such as we are in the process of, we are reviewing, and so forth. And I just really, the only point I wanted to make is that that in and of itself is not an appropriate or an acceptable corrective action response. What you do after the review, that's your corrective action plan. I think it has diminished some, but I know initially we got those types of responses back. I just wanted to kind of make that point.
So who will TVIB obtain the objective evidence from? A good percentage of TVIB customers are under the internal survey program. As a matter of fact, the overwhelming majority are. But even though you use an internal survey program, you use contracted resources to achieve your surveys. It's been found that it's been a little problematic to go back to these external resources to get objective evidence, which really only happens during the survey or audit review process. So when those cases come up, we're going to go back to the survey program manager or the owner or managing operator's representative, whoever that is. Usually it's the same person as the survey program manager. That's who we're going to reach back out to. You owner or managing operator representatives need to make sure that you know or aware of that we'll be coming back to you or someone at your company to get objective evidence. That's it for objective evidence discussion.